And welcome, everyone. This is the Mind Sculptors podcast. I am your host, Callahan, and we've got a great show lined up for you today. Joining me for this episode today is my good friend Pongo. Pongo, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well.
Awesome. And as well, joining us is, of course, the legendary Cobblepott. Cobblepott, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Good to be here.
Awesome. We've got a Strixhaven set review lined up for everybody today. We're going to be breaking down some of the cards that we think are going to be important or worth discussing for the cEDH metagame here in this upcoming set. But before we do that, I just want to thank everybody for joining us this week. If you like this episode or any of our other episodes, please make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below. If you want access to our Discord server as well as some extra content, make sure to head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/The Mind Sculptors, or check out the link in the description. We also now have a TCG Player affiliate link, so if you're going to be buying any cards soon, go ahead and check out that link in the description, and that'll help the show out as well. So like I said, we've got the Strixhaven set review today, and there are some interesting cards we were talking about here before we went on, and there's lots of stuff to unpack here. So let's just go ahead and kind of start it off. Cobble, we're talking with Proctor, and for the people who are unfamiliar with the card, we're gonna let you know it is one colorless and a white creature, flying. That says, whenever a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability to trigger, counter that ability unless its controller pays 2 colorless. Well, 2 of any color, I suppose. So, Cobble, when we're looking at this card and we're trying to evaluate it, thinking of where it kind of lands in the cEDH metagame, what are you thinking about with this?
Right. So, I mean, most people, when they're evaluating this card, the text and the power are going to make you think about things like Hushbringer or Torpor Orb, the kinds of effects that are going to be interacting with triggered abilities of what normally is creatures entering the battlefield. This is the first time that we're seeing something that is interacting with triggered abilities of just any permanent at all. So lands entering the battlefield, enchantments, and so on. So What it's doing here is, instead of being a kind of a hard counter to those powers, the way that Torpor Orb is, it is permissive. So we're allowing whoever is in control of one of those triggered effects the option to either let the effect get countered or to pay 2 and ignore it. And what that does is it gives it some interesting flexibility. For me, when I'm looking for this kind of effect, I don't want to be giving people permission to be able to ignore it, because in most cases, the things that I'm looking to stop when I'm wanting to interact with a triggered ability on ATB are things like Dockside Extortionist or Thassa's Oracle. And
right.
Those 2 right there, because they're so cheap, people are almost always going to be able to have the mana on hand.
2 extra mana.
Exactly. They're going to be able to pay through it. So right there, it's kind of failing at the use case for which I think the naive use case is, the one that people are like, well, I want to have this to be able to keep people from being able to act on the game plan that they're trying to do. If someone's on a Tatyova list or something, and they're wanting to interact with, they want to generate card draw from every land coming into the battlefield, then this will stop that. It's trading this permission for hitting a wider range of triggers. So instead of just creature oriented triggers, it's everything. But for my money, I mean, yeah, you can do some things like you can say, well, if I want a Lotus Field to come into the battlefield and not have to sacrifice the lands, or have a Rest in Peace be able to come in and not exile everything when it enters the battlefield, because most people actually don't even realize that it actually has a triggered when it enters the battlefield, because, well, it just, exiles everything anyway. But if you have a rest in peace enter the battlefield with this in the battlefield, then you can have that option of, well, maybe I want to keep some of the things around in the graveyards and just prohibit new things from entering the graveyard from this point on. So there's some, I guess, interesting stuff that you can do if you're trying to be creative there. But I mean, for my money, I'd rather just have Hushbringer or Torpor Orb and have kind of a hard lockdown on really the two most important effects that are in the metagame that you want to hold up.
Right. And the funny thing to me, I think you mentioned this, is how it interacts with Rest in Peace specifically.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't exile the graveyards. When you could just choose not to pay that ability, which is cute. I don't know that it means much. I mean,
in the case where if someone's got like a Savine's Reclamation, and that's really important, for some line where you're going to be, reiterating things through the graveyard, then you don't want to, lose that. But then again, what are you're running?
Probably not on Rest in Peace.
Yeah,
Anyway.
Why do you have Rest in Peace if that's an important part of your game plan? Why are you doing that? So
yeah, this is going to be a theme that kind of comes up with some of these cards, where they're throughout this podcast. I have this feeling that there is this theme throughout these cards where there's a couple really good cards, and then there's a few cards where there's a weird tension between what it does and what you want to be doing in a strategy that would be interested in this.
Right. I mean, I wouldn't say that I wouldn't expect that this is going to see a lot of play in the cEDH metagame, but it's worth talking about because it is adjacent to the kinds of things that you see in the cEDH metagame, and maybe kind of understanding why it might not have what it needs to be able to have a presence is important. And,
well, y'all know Charles is going to be playing this.
He will.
Right. Yeah, no doubt. It is like Hushbringer's 5 through 8 for like Stifle Knot style decks, like Phyrexian Dreadnought decks in Legacy that are looking to essentially stifle the detrimental ETB trigger.
I mean, you could cast a Croaks into this. There you go.
Right. So I tend to actually agree that this card, it's not super compelling for your average white or multicolored white deck. Mono white maybe plays it just because of, sort of a lack of options. Yeah, exactly. And where I could potentially see it actually seeing some serious play is if in the future we get some kind of commander that's exceptionally powerful, but has like a strong detrimental ETB, where you might want to start like loading up on effects like this because, you want to take advantage of your commander's busted ability, whatever that might be. And this actually does attack the metagame, at least to some extent. So there's at least some upside to running these effects.
Right.
We're not quite there yet, though.
Yeah, we're not quite there, but it's interesting to kind of see that. It's very interesting.
The things that it interacts with profitably are all things that we don't see in cEDH. Is the
right.
thing. You don't see Dreadnought in cEDH. You don't see Lotus Field in cEDH or Uro or any of those other things.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, it's not in a vacuum a bad card. It's just not a well-placed card to have good position in the cEDH.
I say that, except there's a very high probability we'll probably see a Croxa deck pop up in a Major League Commander for this summer.
On the bright side, you won't die to your own leveler, right?
There you go. Well, next card up on our list is blue card. It's called Archmage how do I say this word?
Emeritus.
Emeritus. As you can see, I didn't go to college. So it's 2 colorless and 2 blue pips. It's a creature that's 2/2 with Magecraft that says whenever you cast or copy an instant sorcery spell, draw a card. So this is kind of in that Vidalcan Archmage, Joyra Weatherlight Captain, like vein of card. Pongo, how do you feel about this one?
So it's an interesting card. We've definitely seen cards like this in Magic so far. One that comes to mind right from the start. You mentioned one, There's also like Wave Break Hippocamp that's like somewhat similar. At 3 mana, it's whenever you cast your first spell during each opponent's turn, draw a card. So this obviously has some major upside over that, right? In the sense that you're going to be drawing a card every time you cast an instant. So, for every card that you cast during an opponent's turn. Additionally, for every sorcery. So, you're just drawing tons of cards off this thing. That's for sure. Where it kind of like runs into some issues is the fact that it's at 4 mana. Traditionally, I'm not a huge fan of 4 mana draw engines, but there's certainly I could see a place for it in certain maybe like lower color decks that again don't necessarily have a ton of access to like a lot of super efficient, powerful draw engines. We're talking about blue though, so that might not necessarily be the case. Blue's card pool is quite deep. Where it's kind of really interesting though is specifically in like Quark Sakashima type decks. The whole like copying aspect of it is, I would say, pretty neat. When you consider that
somewhere I can feel Ken just getting really excited.
Right.
It's interesting to me, just as things got spoiled for this set in particular, and I feel like the past couple of sets, I feel like we can almost segment the card pool into, well, here's the cEDH cards and here's the Quark tribal cards. It seems like every set that comes out, there's like, holy cow, this card is bonkers, and Quark tribal. There's just something about the way that deck runs, and I think the way that Wizards is authoring new cards for that, they're just given tons and tons of fuel to the fire of that particular deck.
And one deck that I think kind of goes along in that same vein is like Orvar, where this is really insane in Orvar too. That's wild. Yeah, that's a really good point though, because there really is like this weird,
right?
Say that again.
Low colored Spellslinger decks. That's where you're kind of really looking at a card like this.
Right. I think that, me personally, I'm interested in trying to see if there's some sort of a storm deck that maybe can materialize out of some of the things that we've gotten over the past couple of years. It would contain at least Izzet and maybe one other color, and try to do something with this card and a couple of other cards that we'll see further down, having 1,000-Year Storm out, or casting a Mind's Desire or Flusterstorm or whatever. There's just there may be a critical mass of ways to create extremely big game-ending effects very, very quickly.
More like actual Storm as opposed to just ad nauseam into
and
Thorical combos.
And that's what I'm meaning. More traditional Storm, I think, might be able to be revisited.
I will say I did get the opportunity to see this card in action yesterday. I was playing some games with Cole on the cEDH server, and he was playing his Azami list that's on the database, and he has this card in there. And it put in a lot of work in that list. Being able to tap for Azami and generate card advantage off of just doing what you're going to be doing anyhow. It was honestly I was really impressed with it in that shell, but I think that goes back to more of what we were saying with how in these lower color lists is where you're going to see this. Cause there's no reason to run this in, like Thrasios and Tymna. You've got every advantage or card advantage engine you need.
And that said, when you're playing a stack-based control list, turning every counterspell into a cantrip is significant. If even if that's the extent to which you're exploiting the card, there's still quite a lot that you'll get out of that if you're running 13 counterspells in your list and you want to always have interaction in your hand. It's a really interesting card.
Yeah.
Well, moving on,
just play a Flusterstorm with that out and just become a god.
Right.
Literally
it's like,
go into Super Saiyan mode.
Do a Flusterstorm plus Ancestral Recall tacked on for, no reason. That seems good.
It makes me want to play this card.
Right.
Hey, draft a zombie this for MLC. There you go. On to another interesting card in blue that is coming out here with Strixhaven is a instant called Resculpt. It's 1 in a blue. It's a common, which is really nice. And it reads, exile target artifact or creature. Its controller creates a 4/4 blue and red elemental creature token. So this is part of the Prismary school like card pool. So Cobblepott, you were kind of talking about how this is a little similar to Pongify before the show. Right. How do you feel about this as a comparison to that card?
I mean, 2 mana is quite a bit more than 1 mana.
It is exactly double, believe it or not.
So what this has is you're trading 1 extra mana to be able to have an exile effect. So it doesn't come up often, but there are rare circumstances where destroy effects aren't enough to maybe remove the creature that you're trying to get rid of. This doesn't have that issue. There's kind of more permanence for exiling a target if it's something that is really important for someone's game plan. So for instance, like a Dockside Extortionist, or if someone's got reanimation in their list and they're wanting to they're okay with losing some of their creatures because they'll be able to either Underworld Breach them back or reanimate them or something like that. The exile effects traditionally are stronger. That said, do we really need a 2 mana creature only effect when we a lot of lists are already going to have access to Swords to Plowshares? I don't know if it has quite what it needs to unseat even Pongify Rapid Hybridization, just because. I mean,
we barely play those right now, right?
Right, and that's my point. Is there's not, I don't think, a need for it, and even if there was a need, I don't think it would unseat the already kind of deep resources that we have there. Because I don't think I've ever seen a list that had both Pongify and Rapid Hybridization. And I don't think that this is going to unseat either of those.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, like, people are playing a Braid, for example, right? And this is essentially a Braid in terms of its flexibility, with the downside of creating a 4/4.
Oh, because this hits artifacts. I'm sorry. I'm neglecting that.
Yeah, the fact that it hits artifacts changes the entire equation, right?
Yes, it does. I missed that.
Because otherwise, it's just strictly worse Pongify. I guess not strictly worse, because exile, as you were talking about, is super relevant in a lot of situations.
It's slightly worse.
Yeah, but the fact that it hits artifacts is actually pretty enormous. It's a blue card, and
right.
I mean, that's like a whole can of worms in and of itself. But it hits artifacts and creatures, so it's pretty flexible in that respect. Comparable to something like a Braid, and then. We can really just talk about the downside of the 4/4. I think it's a pretty interesting downside. There's a good number of decks that don't want to be handing out 4/4s that might want to be playing this. For example, like your Turbo Naz style deck, stuff like that. But on the sort of other hand, you can use this kind of like you would use Pongify and rapid hybridization at times to give yourself a 4/4. So there's like sort of multiple angles to this card that I think makes it really interesting. And I do think that this card ends up becoming a strong consideration for a good number of decks.
Right. A 4/4 is different than a 3/3 in that it will survive combat with, I think, most everything in the metagame. The main thing I'm thinking of is Najeela. It'll block and kill Najeela and survive.
Right. And in multiplayer, giving people 4/4s like that can potentially, it can hurt you, right? In the sense that you're going to take damage. But imagine you cast this card in the middle of combat when somebody swings with their Najeela, hit somebody's Null Rod, and give them a 4/4 that they can block the Najeela with, right? Like,
Right.
you know, that is a lot of value, even if you're going to end up losing 4 life sort of later down the line.
I actually really like the comparison of this to a braid. Actually, the more I think about it, this really does feel like a blue abrade to me.
Yeah, but not limited to 3 toughness.
Right. Yeah, no, that's an interesting way of thinking about it. As I was already kind of like looking at this and going, like him and Han over it. And like, do I even put this in the maybe board of like Lavinia stuff? And I don't know. It's interesting.
For the case of a braid, what are the artifacts that are problem artifacts that people need to get rid of?
Null Rod for sure.
Null Rod, Sphere Effects occasionally. Theoretically, sometimes you need to hit like a Torpor Orb or something. There's a few others, but obviously, like you have like big artifact targets, but a lot of them don't see a ton of play. And then just being able to hit random things like Basalt Monolith out of like a random Kinnan deck can be useful too. Artifact removal is very, very powerful. Creature removal is increasingly powerful. Staple them together and you get very flexible removal. Stick it in blue and you've got a card that I would say probably shouldn't exist, but here we are and we can talk about it.
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know if this will see play or not, or if it's worth trying, but it's certainly an intriguing card. Our next card is also a very intriguing card, and I put in our show notes that every time I read this card, it just continues to get better. Is Plumb the Forbidden, which is a 1 colorless and black instant spell that says, as an additional cost to cast the spell, you may sacrifice 1 or more creatures. When you do, copy this spell for each creature sacrificed this way. And then the spell reads, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. So, that's a good card. Pongo, right?
Yeah,
I'm on Pongo now. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So Pongo, when we're looking at this card, tell me what you think about it.
All right. So one important thing to realize about this card, first of all, is that you don't actually have to sacrifice any creatures. If you don't sacrifice any creatures, then for 2 mana, you draw a card and lose a life at instant speed, which is not a good card, but that's not what we're here for. When you sacrifice 1 creature, you get to subsequently draw 2 cards and lose 2 life because you're going to copy this spell 1 time. If I'm being honest with you, for the decks that I play, I'm not the biggest fan. Obviously like Najeela comes to mind. And I would probably be playing something like Skull Clamp over this. Just because drawing 2 cards for the 1 mana feels a little bit stronger. And kind of being able to like do that repeatably over multiple turns and not have to like commit all in one shot. Everything is also relevant. Not losing life is pretty relevant. But this card is certainly interesting. I could definitely imagine it seeing play perhaps in, some kind of maybe like token based strategy or like, like a black-green, maybe black-green-red deck that really cares a lot about like sacrificing things for potential value. The issue is that there's generally more like high value things you can be doing, sacrificing your fodder. So I'm not convinced that this is going to see a ton of play, but it's a really interesting card, and I like the design quite a bit.
I would agree. I think that it is a cool design. I like the fact that the number of creatures that you feed to it creates copies of it, and it makes it more difficult for opponents to interact with, because it effectively is kind of manual do-it-yourself storm, basically, because you're basically storming for rather than the number of spells you've cast, it's the number of creatures that you sacrificed. And you're putting that many copies onto the stack, which then means that somebody either flusterstorms it or you're going to be drawing the cards. So it has that interesting quality to it, rather than having kind of one point of interaction where one counterspell will, cause you to lose your investment. That said, I think I agree with Pongo that, Skull Clamp for sure is a more powerful way to extract value from your tokens. I don't know. Is there really a strong non-Najeela token strategy in the metagame at the moment?
Well, one that also comes to mind would be like Tevesh Zod, but Tevesh Zod would prefer to just sacrifice his tokens to himself, right?
That's exactly. And I don't even really feel like Tevesh Zod qualifies as like a token strategy.
No,
because he's going to generate 2 tokens and do stuff with it from here and there, but there's not something that's trying to the way Najeela is, for instance, trying to create 10s or 20s of tokens and swarm the board. I don't know if there's, maybe Orvar, but Orvar doesn't have access to this card. I think that it's a really cool design that I don't think has a home yet.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting. My thought is, it feels like a card that in Najeela has the potential to be a 2-mana ad nauseum. But I don't know. You all bring up really valid points, and I don't know.
For it to be close to ad nauseum, you need to have
20 tokens out.
and at that point,
you've already kind of got the game won.
Yeah.
Right. But even if you get the value of, say, you have 10 out and you're real close, you just need those extra few cards. I don't know. I'm probably over evaluating this card.
You might be a little bit, but it doesn't make it a bad card. It has really interesting qualities that I think if when the circumstances arise that a non-Najeela token strategy kind of exists in the metagame, it would certainly be a consideration,
right?
Because it absolutely is a powerful and cheap. If we're going to compare it to Skull Clamp, the amount of mana that you're going to spend is going to be proportional to the number of creatures you're sacrificing. Right. Whereas this is a static, you spend 2 mana and then just sacrifice all the things and then draw all the cards. It does have some very powerful qualities. I just don't think that it has the home just yet.
Yeah, imagine we get a commander like Endrick Czar, right? It's like,
yes.
Let's say it's like whenever you cast a non-creature spell, instead of a creature spell, you get X 1/1s tokens. Then this card probably pretty quickly does become 2 mana ad nauseum, right? So right.
I think there already is. Isn't there already there was a card printed in this set that has Magecraft for creating a 1/1 token, doesn't it? Every time you copy something.
Legendary card though.
Maybe I
don't think it's in the colors either. Because I think like the token creation is like blue-green's thing in this set.
Right.
I thought it had black. Anyway.
I don't know.
It could be. Anyhow. Black could be black-green, right? That would make sense as well.
That's
for
true.
The 1/1s.
Yeah, that would also make sense. Anyway. But yeah, it's an interesting card. I am excited to see what can come from it potentially. Next card up on our list as we move over into red. Not a lot of black this time around. That is really worth mentioning. Is Conspiracy Theorist. It is a creature that costs 1 and a red. It's a 2/2 that says whenever Conspiracy Theorist attacks, you may pay 1 and discard a card. If you do, draw a card. Whenever you discard 1 or more non-land cards, you may exile 1 of them from your graveyard. If you do, you may cast it this turn. So, Cobble, there's a lot of things with this card that come to mind, and it's very reminiscent of some other cards from Magic's history that we are familiar with. What are your kind of thoughts on Conspiracy Theorist?
This card feels very much to me like the next kind of iteration of what I'll call the Red Bobs. The Robin Hood character,
Robber of the Rich,
Robber of the Rich. There's kind of it seems like there's this sequence of Bob lookalikes that they're trying to do in Red. The cost 2 that through some hoops allow you to gain card advantage each turn, basically like a Bob, but rather than paying life for it, you are exiling the card and you have to make use of it while it's exiled, or you lose it, that kind of thing. So in this particular case, on your turn, you attack with this creature, you pay the 1 and you discard a card, and it triggers itself. So, now you can exile that card and still get to use it this turn, but you got to use it this turn, and then you get to draw something else. So it's not as good as a Bob would be, because it's not allowing you to just accumulate the cards in hand. It's allowing you to see more cards and still be able to potentially cast them, but you're not accumulating the cards over time. Now, the discard ability, or the interaction, the trigger that it has when you do discard cards, that triggers anytime you discard. So it doesn't just it's not just one of those situations where you can only extract that value when you attack with it. So it's an interesting design in that sense. That said, I think it's hard to exploit. So I think somebody, when this first got printed, somebody kind of pinged me and said, "Hey, is this something that would fit well with Shadow Bag?" Where you're doing stuff with Bone Miser, or doing things with Shadow of the Grave and so on. And I feel like it really doesn't, because what that engine wants to do is it wants to discard cards to draw more cards, but then have access to the cards that it discarded to get them back again, so that it can discard them again. So you want to kind of, through repetition, be discarding your cards so that you can get reuse from them. If you're allowing him to trigger and exile those cards and say, well, now it's basically like you're drawing those cards. It's like, yes, you do have access to them, but now you can't reuse them to dig deeper. So
right.
Unless you have a really strong draw engine that is, somehow like Anya, where you're doing like madness cards and stuff like that, then this winds up, I think, having some legs in that circumstance, where you're discarding madness cards, which allow you to untap Anya, and then you can keep on doing that without actually losing access to those cards that you're discarding. So it's like straight draw. Then it's a really powerful ability. But outside of that specific engine, I don't know if it's got anything great. Like, so for instance, it interacts with Necropotence. So in the same way that Bag of Holding interacts with Necropotence, you've got 2 competing exile triggers. You can choose which one you want to allow to exile. You can do the same thing here. You've got a Necropotence in play. If something would cause you to discard a card, then you can have this guy eat that card instead, and then you can cast it. But I mean,
which one would you rather have? The one that you can get back in 3 turns, or the one that goes away at the end of the turn?
I think probably the one you can get it back. Yep. Survey says that's probably the one that you want to do. But I don't know. I think this fits well with Anja, but I don't know if that's really a deck that people play anymore. I think it's a cool card. Again, this is not the card that's going to make Shadow Bag a commanding presence in the metagame for sure.
Not to not to name drop again, there's a pretty high likelihood that Anje gets played this summer in Major League Commander.
Probably.
There's
And, I mean, for at least one
138
game,
decks.
yeah.
For at least one game. There's 138 decks, and they're going to draft 128 of them. So there's a pretty high likelihood you'll see some of these decks in the database that we're that doesn't get played.
This card is a good slot for that deck, but I think that deck is the only one where this winds up being good. So
if you're one of the 32 people playing in Major League Commander and you're listening to this, there you go. That is a card to consider, Conspiracy Theorist. Moving on down the list to another red card. There's a handful of red cards this year that were actually...
There's always a handful of red cards.
There's always a handful of red cards. That's true. But this time around, there's a handful that of varying quality this time. This one is pretty good. It's called Fervent Mastery. It's a sorcery that costs 3 colorless and 2 red that says you may pay 2 colorless and 2 red rather than pay the spell's mana cost. If the 2 colorless and 2 red cost was paid, an opponent discards any number of cards, then draws that many cards. Now, if you did pay the 5 mana cost, search your library for up to 3 cards, put them into your hand, shuffle, then discard 3 cards at random.
Just to clarify, that last part that you read is the effect of the card, and it doesn't matter how much you paid for it. So whether you paid whether you paid 4 or 5, you always get that.
Yeah, that's what the card does.
Holy cow. Okay, never mind. I completely misunderstood how these cards work, and these got infinitely better to me all of a sudden.
Right.
Wow, that's great.
Right. So you either pay for it for a cheaper price and let your opponent do something, or you pay the more expensive price and you just get the effect of the card.
Right.
Wow, that's interesting. Okay. So Pongo, what do you think of Fervent Mastery?
Well, I don't think I'm quite as excited about it as you seem to be. So I think at 4 mana, that is actually a pretty significant downside, or potential downside. Like letting an opponent effectively loot any number of cards that they want. In some matchups can be like huge liability. And then in other matchups is just like they get the opportunity to improve their card quality quite a bit. So it's still a downside, and it's still a pretty significant downside, even if it's not like quite as bad as it would be in the other case. As for the actual effect, triple gamble, as this is essentially, is pretty strong. At 5 mana, I'm not sure that it's quite there for, like your 3+ color decks. But in like low color red decks, I don't hate this at all. I think, those decks are pretty happy to get additional tutor support. Especially if they're doing like breach type stuff and like can actually leverage graveyard value. This seems pretty decent. But yeah, I think, at 5 mana, it just doesn't scale well against like the options that a lot of other decks have, and doesn't compare especially well to something like Intuition being a 3 mana blue instant. It doesn't quite telegraph your line nearly as hard as this does, potentially.
Right.
So yeah.
It's red is, notoriously poor in its tutor quality. So if you're in mono red, then there's certainly I would say, compromises that people have to make to admit, their to increase the number of tutors that they have. They take on liabilities in many cases, a lot of times in the mana cost. So one of the things that mitigates that a little bit for the 4 mana version of this spell is that you get to choose the opponent. So if you have an opponent that is hellbent or only has 1 or 2 cards in hand or something like that, then the downside of letting them loot as many cards as they want is going to be lower than if all of your opponents are all sitting at 7 cards.
Right.
sure.
Right.
But the fact that you have the flexibility of being able to choose based on the game state, if you've got all of your opponents at 7, then you pay the full cost for it. Again, is this a good rate for that? I would say maybe not. But then again, if you're in mono red, then you kind of take what you can get.
Yeah, even blue red decks don't really have a ton of options, and I think that this ends up being potentially a lot more interesting in blue red.
I think that white red.
I was about to say that,
because you can assemble LED, Underworld Breach, and Savine's Reclamation. It's basically the things that you would intuition for, but without having access to blue. If you're in Izzet, then I think you just do intuition. Then as opposed to this,
you're still, I think, pretty low in terms of like functional density of that effect, such that something like this feels potentially playable just to get the redundancy.
Yep.
I think it's a decent card. I'm going to give it a solid B.
My whole thought on it is it feels all right in decks that are low color and also have some thief effects in them.
Yeah, that was my thought.
Right. If you got a Hull Breacher in play, this card gets a lot better.
Right.
I mean, they discard no cards, but at least you
just paid one less.
Yeah, exactly.
There's just layers to it that I like. Obviously, my reaction's probably a little bit higher a moment ago than what reality is. It's just like me realizing it's like, oh, you're not paying for, and then making somebody else do that. I was like, why the hell would you do that? I don't know why I thought that, but
Well, there's like a similar mechanic in the commander decks, where it's like you can copy the spell and one opponent also gets to copy it. So maybe you have that in mind. Yeah, demonstrate. We're not going to be talking about any of the commander cards today worth mentioning, but maybe you have that in mind, Callahan.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking. Anyhow, on to our next card. It is Storm-Kiln Artist. Sorry, I couldn't see the second word there. It is a creature that's a 2/2 that costs 3 colorless in a red. That reads Storm-Kiln Artist, gets +1/+0 for each artifact you control. Also has Magecraft that says whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, create a treasure token. So automatically the first thing you kind of see this is it's like, oh, this generates some mana. So what are your thoughts on this cobble and where it might land?
So this is one of the other cards that we were talking about that fits into the Kraken Sakashima segment of the set. So this is, Magecraft. It's triggering when you cast instants and sorceries, but also when you copy them. So this is going to be triggering all the time in Kraken Sakashima, which is I wouldn't say not as good as that other one, the Emeritus, the Archmage Emeritus, just because it's not creating card advantage, but it is powering out it's allowing you to cast your spells again and again and again, which if you're not familiar with the Krark tribal lists, the idea is that it very much needs a ritual in order to kind of take off, because it needs to be able to cast a spell and net mana in order to keep going. In this particular case, this guy being on the battlefield will eliminate the requirement of needing to have a ritual in hand, and just having a cantrip will basically allow you to, if you got this guy in a cantrip and you've got a couple of Karks, then your game is won, because for every copy you get, you're making a treasure token, which means that's going to cover the cantrip being cast again. And it's just going to give you the mana solvency you're going to need to, just do what you want to do. All of that said, outside of Krark, I think that we think about this similarly to the way we were thinking about that Archmage Emeritus, where, you know, if there's a list that is a spell slinging, you know, according to Hoyle storm list that's playing things that are actually that have the word storm on them, and or, you know, 1,000-Year Storm, or, you know, those types of things. This gets, you know, absolutely out of control very, very quickly. You know, someone you cast a Flusterstorm and you get 5+ treasures out of casting a Flusterstorm. I think that's a pretty good rate. It's not the same thing as drawing 5 cards from a Flusterstorm, but it's still generating a huge amount of value. And if you're playing a highly interactive list, you know, having all of your counter spells, which is kind of the thing that I'm defaulting to as where in evaluating this. If every one of your counter spells is creating a treasure for you, it's not the same thing as all of those things cantripping, but that's still quite a bit of value. It's the same mana cost as Smothering Tithe, and it's not going to create as many treasures as Smothering Tithe is by any stretch. But it is, I think, in similar vein as to how we would think about how that card is going to behave. I think that it's a fun effect, and I mean, yes, this is a windmill slam right into Krark. Elsewhere, I think you have to think about it a little bit more before, I think, making that commitment.
Interesting. It'll be really interesting to see where this lands. These Magecraft cards in Krark are real funny.
It may turn out that we're under evaluating those, and someone winds up devising a storm list, and these things are all insanely powerful.
So one of the
might
things,
be the case.
One of the things that I did kind of think is that, like, I was thinking specifically in decks that are doing, what's it called? Dramatic reversal stuff with Isochron Scepter. It almost acts as another mana rock, because it means that every soul ring, you only need a soul ring out in order for dramatic reversal. Yeah. You only need soul ring in this out for dramatic reversal to net mana. So there's like a level to it where I think it's actually intriguing on that level, because there is some merit to the thought of this in Archmage Emeritus on the, okay, so if you are in like a storm list with those cards in it, with the why did I just said dramatic reversal, and these provide additional outlets for those that don't need you to be netting mana per activation, and I think that's potentially powerful. I don't know how good it is, but it has some merit to at least discuss, right? Like,
right. I think it remains to be seen.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily convinced, especially at 4 mana. I think that there's a lot of competition, obviously, for slots these days, and so while this effect is very powerful, certainly the ceiling is much higher than something like Brawl. But like kind of the average of the card is somewhat similar. The floor is obviously lower, right? Like you might not just be able to cast that card, where Brawl might like allow you to cast a certain instant or sorcery just by virtue of actually giving you a discount. Obviously, if you don't necessarily need that discount in one particular turn, you would much rather like gain material on the board sort of to use later. But for twice the mana cost, I'm not quite sure that it's enough of an advantage. When you consider that, like, a lot of your cards are mana anyway. You're playing a ton of rituals and stuff.
And that's kind of my kind of thinking too. To be fair, is like, because I immediately think to like Siggy's Paradox Storm list from Days of Yore, where, you know, would it even be worth playing in that with Paradox Engine out, right? Like and that's where you would see that, and these dramatic reversal Icecrown Scepter lists have already fallen out of favor anyhow. So I'm probably just talking out of my ass, but it's just one of those things where I look at it and I go, oh, well, because I my brain still hasn't fully come out of like 2017 cEDH. Because I'm always just like, oh, you could do, that's an outlet for dramatic reversal. And, you know, it's just not as much of a thing anymore. But, you know,
right. I think when comparing this to something like Smothering Tithe that costs 4, and people will tolerate the cost of paying 4 because of the fact that it's passive, and the value that it's generating is based on the decisions of your opponents and the activity of your opponents rather than your own decisions and activity. You can pay the 4 because it's going to be generating so much more value. In the case of something like this, well, all of the value that you're going to get from it is self-derived. So you've got to be on your game to generate that value, because you're the only one who's going to be creating it. So the mana cost of 4 in that case feels much steeper because it's all on you, as opposed to being deferred to the activity of your opponents. So yeah, remains to be seen.
Yeah, sorry, I had to answer a question. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think one of the things that does make it a little bit more intriguing is that first half of it, actually, because the decks that are going to be playing this, right, are going to be playing probably a high density of artifacts, I would assume. So it does make a potentially big body. So I don't know. There's a lot of things there I could talk about it with. I think it's an interesting card. Probably won't see much play, but it's fascinating. The next card on our list, I do think, is probably going to see some play. It's Culling Ritual. It's 2 colorless mana, black and a green. It's a sorcery that says destroy each non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less. And then you add black or green for each permanent destroyed this way. So when we're looking at this card, I believe throwing this one to Pongo.
My turn.
Yeah. This card has a lot going on, and it's all pretty good stuff. So kind of let us know how you feel about it.
Nice. Great transition there. So I actually think that this card might be like hot take. I think this might be kind of like the sleeper card of the set. And I've talked about this in a few different places where I feel like this card is actually quite nuts and people are really not talking about it. So like, obviously this card is particularly strong in the context of like, you know, some kind of deck that is going to lean on rituals to power out something. And so the play pattern that I can imagine for a lot of these decks is that, you know, you have a few rocks in play, you tap your rocks, tap a couple of lands to pay for this. Maybe, you know, tap a land or something, cast it. You know, if it resolves, you blow up all of your rocks, you blow up all of everyone else's rocks, you blow up all of their mana dorks, you blow up all of their, you know, the stacks pieces that cost 2 or less. And then you make a ton of mana, and then you just cast like an Ad Nauseam, or you cast a Peer into the Abyss. So like, that's pretty wild. Obviously, you know, where this could get even more disgusting would have been if it hit things that cost 3 or less, so it could hit Rule of Laws. So obviously that's going to be one sort of limitation of the card. But I do still think that it is certainly going to be powerful enough, even missing those cards, just because of the potential burst mana that it produces. I'm somewhat interested in trying it out in Najeela, just because like you get all those tokens in play and you're hitting everybody else's stuff. You're making a ton of mana. And if you can funnel that into an ad nauseum, that's like pretty wild. You should get there pretty much every time from that point.
This is what gets so wild with this card to me, because it's funny because you say that like people aren't talking about this card, but it's funny because like the circles you and I run in, you and I immediately were like, holy shit, this card's really good. And like the Lavinia Discord saw this card and we were all just like, God damn it, really? And I
was waiting for a Lavinia mention.
Oh my gosh. I saw this card. I've never cried in Azoria so hard. This is one of those cards where like Whimsy was like, see, this is why you got to be on Grand Arbiter. But this card, in my opinion, you look at this because you just imagine with me, come on a trip with me for a moment, where we sit down, your opponent goes land Dork Pass. Then the next opponent plays like a land, I don't know, plays like a Chrome Mox's Sylvan Library. Sure. Next opponent plays a Mystic Remora. Sure. You go to your turn and you already have a land in a Mana Crypt out. You play your next land and you cast this. So you're getting 1, 2, 3, 4. You're getting like 6 mana off of this. That's ad nauseam on turn 2. Easy.
It's big ritual potential off of this card. And it's like, it doesn't have the dockside problem of like kind of just being a little bit weak if people are playing dork decks.
Yeah.
Like if it's an entire dork pod and you're just like a little sad with your dockside that only makes 2 mana, this just scales anyway, right? Like,
right.
And it sets everyone back in that respect. It's a little all in certain situations, but like in other, like those decks don't care. Let's just put it that way, right?
Right.
It's not unusual for decks like that to play something like a Rain of Filth and sacrifice all their lands trying to get there. So this doesn't seem necessarily too out of character for them.
And it can unlock you from something that's holding you back from being able to cast a Naz. If you're a Naz player, you're playing against the Lavinia deck, or you're playing against any deck that's playing an effect. Let's say you're going up against a Dranith, for instance. This isn't just a ritual. It's also a pseudo board wipe. And so like there's just like all those different pieces to that. In my opinion, you look at that, the fact that it's the board wipe and ritual stapled together is just really good.
I will so gladly play this against Najeela.
Oh no. See, that's what I'm afraid of. I should definitely have kept this card. Or I should have definitely said this card is trash.
I think the secret was already out. So this has lower variance, like you were saying, than Dockside, because depending on the table texture, sometimes Dockside is just crazy, and sometimes it's just not as good, depending on the list that you're playing against. There's always. I think that in general, it's going to trend higher than Dockside will, as far as the mana that it's netting you. Now, you don't get to keep it. You got to use it right away. But I mean, if somebody said, here, would you play a Dockside Extortionist that destroys all permanents that are 2 mana or less on the battlefield? I mean, like that seems pretty good. And to your point, Callahan, the fact that it has the utility of acting as not just a ritual, but as removal. I mean, there are going to be circumstances where, okay, sure. You need to do something about the Najeela player who's getting out of hand, or there's, some permanent that's causing problems on the board, like your Dranith Magistrate, or, casting this without a requisite follow-up isn't always going to be wrong. Using it just for its removal capability without following it up with, another play after that.
Right.
It's got that flexibility, and I think is it plays to the value and the power of the card.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. I think that it's really, really good, and people are definitely lowballing their assessments of it, just because I haven't seen people in the cEDH echelons talking about it all that much.
Well, and that's a whole different discussion, is the undervalue of removal in cEDH at the moment. But that's a podcast unto itself. Next card up on the list here is Solve the Equation. It is, I guess we're going back to blue here real quick, is a 2 colorless and a blue sorcery. You guys are changing my show notes in the middle of the show.
Somebody ninja edited the show notes. Pongo, was that you?
That may have been me. Yeah, I looked at the show
and I go down and I'm like, what the hell?
And I was like, wait, we have to talk about this card. There's a few others.
Yeah. Solve the Equation. It's a 3 mana. It costs 2 colorless and a blue sorcery. Search your library for an instant sorcery card, reveal it, put it in your hand. I mean, this is it's
idyllic tutor for
instants and sorceries.
Right.
Yeah.
Pongo, you're the one who ninja edited that in there, so you can talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Real quick, I think this card needed to be mentioned, not because it's like new format staple or anything for high color decks or anything, but mostly because, again, it's like a new option for lower color decks. It's a card type that is like way more relevant than enchantments, I would think, is, and in particular, like for blue decks, looking for an instance or sorcery is very, very powerful. In theory, I could actually even potentially see this seeing play in like ad nauseum style decks where, like those have played 3 mana tutors in the past. And this is just, another 3 mana tutor that you can play to find ad nauseum or peer into the abyss. 3 mana is like not great, but we don't get new tutors all that often. And this one, is very strong, I think. Like Spellseeker is a playable card and it finds instants and sorceries that only cost 2 or less. This one does not care about the mana cost. It doesn't leave behind a body, but for a good number of decks, that's not incredibly relevant. It's not the end of the world. It's just, you just want the extra tutor. And so this is, certainly more powerful along one axis. So I definitely think this card is going to see play 100%.
What lists do you see?
Yeah, I want to hear what lists you think.
Right. Having the need to slot it in.
So, I mean, like theoretically, like Kinnan could potentially be interested in this. Urza, I could definitely see playing this. I could see, like I was saying even before, theoretically there's a world where, like sort of like turbo ad nauseum style decks play it. Just like looking for, another copy of Intuition or looking for another copy of Peer into the Abyss and ad nauseum. So, I think that the comparison to Spellseeker is one that's worth making and worth pointing out. Because Spellseeker is like an obvious format staple. I think no one would disagree with that. I
think it is, though, because of the fact that it's a creature.
Being a creature is super relevant. Yeah, like that's for sure. And I would think that a lot of in saying that, it's important to point out that a lot of the decks that play Spellseeker play it because they can use it to convert creature tutors into instants and sorceries. But, I think that this just another 2-hand tutor for instants and sorceries is certainly something that decks there are decks out there that want this. And while I'm not 100% convinced that we're going to see it in like the high color decks, even the ones that really, really want to find very particular instants and sorceries, I do think that lower color decks are pretty happy to have this.
Believe it or not. Okay. We're not playing this in Lavinia.
Oh my goodness! Here
I mean, it's just we don't have good targets for it.
Yeah.
And what are we gonna go get? Like another Flusterstorm?
Right.
That's kind of where I'm at with it. As I look at it, I'm like, I mean, I guess it's fine. It's just
No, you need a pretty important instant or sorcery sort of payoff for your deck before you're going to play this. You're not going to play it just to find, a counter spell. Potentially not even just to find a draw spell. You'll play another draw spell, but Kinnan, for example, could use this to find an artifact tutor, an outlet for sort of infinite colorless mana in something like a Stroke of Genius, a bounce spell if it the deck needs to answer a stacks piece, something like that, right? It's just important redundancy for a wide variety of effects.
Actually, it actually seems really strong in Urza the more I think about it.
For the same reasons, right? Because theoretically, you might want to find dramatic reversal. Theoretically, you might want to find like a polymorph type effect. I
mean, maybe like 3-color Nozzlists are interested. I don't know.
I think, when there's a tutor that is somewhat reasonably costed and finds like a card type that is like actually relevant, there's definitely a deck out there for it, right? Or a deck that is looking for it. And so I wanted to at least bring up Solve the Equation so that we could have this little discussion about it.
Sure.
Fair enough. Next card up on our list is a card that our good friend Rebel did do a video on. Is called Kasmina Enigma Sage. It's a planeswalker that costs 3. It's 1 colorless.
Wait, what did you say? Enigma Sage?
Did I?
That's what I heard. Yeah,
I heard that too. That's definitely a much hotter name than Enigma Sage. But,
Enigma Sage, Jesus Christ!
That like adds a whole new level of flavor. If it's Enigma Sage, just kind of. Anyway.
That's like the second card today I've read, and just like.
Well, now we're going to discuss if this card is in fact poop or not.
Wow. It costs 1 colorless green and a blue. It's a planeswalker that says each other planeswalker you control has the loyalty abilities of Kasmina Enigma Sage. In its abilities are +2, that says scry 1, -X, that says create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token, put X +1/+1 counters on it. And this is the big one. -8, search your library for an instant or sorcery card that shares a color with this planeswalker. Exile that card, then shuffle. You may cast that card without paying its cost. So it's a good card. So like I said, Rebel did do a video with it. And so Cobble, you've been on the Tevish Thrasios, the Sultai Tevish thing. I've seen you posted on Twitter about it. What are your thoughts on this card and how it plays into that Tevish Zot deck?
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting design. I don't think, when people look at this, I think the first thing that it will make them think of is the Nicol Bolas that had the loyalty abilities of the other planeswalkers that you control. This is kind of the inverse of that, and it winds up as Rebel illustrated really well in her video. It creates a lot of really interesting utility for existing planeswalkers, and also just kind of like adds this extra layer of power, particularly to Tevesh, just because Tevesh starts off at 4 and very quickly can reach 8 loyalty. So getting to 8 loyalty is not a problem. And with Tevesh, if you do the -8, well, Tevesh has black in his color identity, so you can -8 and go and find Ad Nauseam or Peer into the Abyss and cast it for free. So that is really, really strong, just because of the fact that it is, saving you the overhead of, well, first of all, finding the card and casting the card. So it's leaving you all of your resources to be able to protect it. And if you're in Sultai, I mean, you've got all of the ways to protect it at your disposal. So being able to go and search up an ad nauseum and have all of your resources, all of your cards in hand at the ready to be able to fight through anybody's interaction to stop you from doing that. It's a really, really good position to be in.
Mm-hmm.
But even outside of Tevesh, walkers like Narset and Ashiok that are from the War of the Spark, that were the uncommon planeswalkers where they didn't have a plus ability. Giving them the ability to scry 1, okay, that's nice, but giving them the ability to
regain counters,
regain their loyalty is significant, because especially in the case like for Narset, that's a big target. People don't like having Narset on the board, and they will use the resources that they have to get rid of her, through combat when necessary. And giving her the ability to have +2 ability on her loyalty, that breaks the intended design of that walker and makes it much, much stronger, giving it a lot of staying power.
I mean, that's an extra ability. That's an extra Narset activation.
Oh, for sure. It's one of those things where really, when people are playing Narset or playing Ashiok, I mean, they're not really playing those walkers for their loyalty abilities. They're playing them for their statics. So you don't really care that, I'm spending my time doing this +2 scry ability and I'm not getting access to their others. Really, the reason you have them is because of their static abilities. You don't really care which of those loyalties you're making use of, but giving them more staying power to stay on the board to perpetuate those statics is very significant. The other big, card that dovetails well with Kasmina is Teferi, Master of Time. That's the new Teferi that can activate his loyalty abilities during each player's turns. I mean, because his clock basically used to be you +1 him on your turn, and then +1 him on each of your opponent's turns, and you get him to, what is it, -10 for the taking 2 extra turns. I forget. I don't remember off the top of my head. I don't.
It's -8, but I might be wrong.
Anyway, being able to +2 on on every single turn instead of +1.
You're right.
Yeah, makes that clock. I mean, well, if it comes back to your turn, you're getting that ability. So you just get there and you're able to take those extra turns much, much faster. It's just there's just a lot of really, really cool. I mean, that's just 4 planeswalkers that we're looking at, and there's others that we could probably also evaluate.
Narset Transcendent.
Seriously, I mean, that would be sweet.
That would be wild.
Right. So it's now, is that an archetype? Is that something that is what we want to be doing in Sultai? I mean, maybe, because it is still, it's slower than, Turbo Naz. It's slower than the other decks that are wanting to be on more proactive than interactive strategies. This stuff is kind of, pushing you into wanting to take a somewhat slower, more interactive strategy. I think it remains to be seen whether that is, something that the metagame will tolerate. But I don't know. It's again a really, really cool design, and I'm going to be interested to test out some of those interactions.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'll probably build some Sultai Tevesh Thrasios pile to play around with this. Because I mean, it seems like my sort of mid-range nonsense that I would want to be on. It looks interesting, and I didn't think about the Teferi Master of Time synergy at all until you brought it up. But that's really insane.
Yeah.
My main concern is that like all these interactions feel a little bit win more. So I'm not sure that like it's something you're necessarily going to want to actually be running, just because of like, you have to be pretty solidly ahead for all of that to actually kind of come together.
I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true.
I mean, I would say for the case of Tevesh Sat, being able to activate them twice and then be able to go and find Peer into the Abyss and cast it for free. I don't think that that's win more. I mean, I think that's win because, it's giving you
already cast Tevesh Sat and you've already been able to like activate him a few times. Like you could just be generating Tevesh Sat value rather than playing Kasmina alongside your Tevesh Sat, right?
So I do what? +1 Tevesh, make the 2 blockers, next turn +2. And then the turn after that I can activate, right? Like
you have to +2 twice in a row. So that's creating the tokens twice.
To create the blockers and then +1 to draw cards.
Okay, so I +2 create the blockers. Next turn I +2 again to scry 1. Next turn I'm searching, and I mean you're already playing a mid-range control value strategy anyway. I mean, I think there is something to be said about the undervalue, how people in cEDH tend to undervalue the power of walkers. And I think this is a card that showcases that power that they have, especially when they run in groups.
Well, but Kasmina herself is not very powerful, right? Like,
well, she makes other walkers better.
That's the issue, right? So like walkers, you're claiming that they're fairly powerful, but why do I need to play a walker to make my other walkers more powerful along, your line of thinking? Tevesh Sat is a very powerful card in and of himself. And I think that if you can get to his ultimate, you're going to win almost certainly.
Well, why do I need to run any card that enables like an Underworld Breach then? Like if Underworld Breach is already really good, like why do I need to do anything that enables that then?
Maybe like Underworld Breach isn't that good on its own, right? Like Underworld Breach, when you have kind of the shell built around it, becomes pretty decent, but like without the whole brain freeze or like grinding station type combo, like maybe it isn't quite good enough, right? And I've tried playing Breach without brain freeze or a grinding station, and I haven't been hugely impressed by it.
Right, but that's kind of my point. Is like I'm talking about like, we talk about like, okay, so we're talking about like a Sultai Walker strategy, and what we're talking about is a card that is very much in the brain freeze, the enabler to the other card category here. Right. Because like it would be very disingenuous to say that Brain Freeze is a win more card. But and what this feels like is if I'm going to be on this strategy that's in these colors, that's utilizing these walkers, which is going to automatically put you into some sort of mid-range strategy, you are going to benefit from running this card. And I don't think that it's making you win more. I think it's adding a layer to your deck that's enabling something that could potentially be a win. Like, especially if my deck is built around, all right, I want to get Tevesh Sat out. I want to play mid-range, like a mid-range Peer strategy. And I get to cast Peer into this for free. That's pretty damn good.
I mean, you're doing it for free, like 3 turns later? As well, like you have Tevesh out for multiple turns, and you had enough mana to cast Tevesh. So like I don't know, it just at that point that's what I'm getting at, where it feels a little win more. If we talk about something like Underworld Breach, it's a much more proactive play. Just you slam Underworld Breach for 2 mana and just win at that point. You don't have to develop your 5-drop and then develop this 3-drop later.
I don't think developing the 5-drop is that insane anymore. I see turn 1 Tevesh just all the time.
Like that is the plan a good amount of the time. It just feels like certainly, you can't compare an 8 mana investment that also requires 3 turns of keeping your permanents in play, or keeping at least one of them in play, to like 2 mana in Underworld Breach.
Sure.
And, I mean, there's also like certain amount of blowout potential in the sense that, like, imagine you sequence it so that you get your Tevesh to 8 and you're ready to activate him again. And then you cast your Kasmina because you don't want to like necessarily be
paint a target on it.
Yeah, exactly. And then let's say Tevesh gets like bounced and then you're just stuck with Kasmina in play, at 4 and she might get attacked at that point. Or you have to spend another 3 turns or potentially 4 turns like replaying Tevesh to try to get that whole combo going again. And like meanwhile, Kasmina is not that powerful of a card on her own.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, like the synergy, if you can pull that off, it's certainly powerful. There's no denying that. It's just that I don't know that Tevesh needs that to be as powerful, right?
Right. I don't know. It'll be interesting. I get what you're saying. But we could probably talk in circles on that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So wax poetic.
What'd you say?
We could wax poetic.
The next card on our list,
or we just Enigma ourselves.
Coming back to it, yeah.
Guys,
it's a good day.
I quit. Next card on our list is Rush Rebirth. It's a instant that costs a black and a green that says choose target creature. When that creature dies this turn, search your library for a creature card with lesser mana value, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. This is a very intriguing card, and Pongo, I'm sure you have some thoughts. So what do you think about it?
So, when we're looking over the show notes, obviously we're emphasizing here, all of the, trading your own Tymna so that or trading your own Najeela, more importantly, in combat.
Please block it.
So that you can get an Oracle or a Dockside. I'm just like, no. What is this? This feels pointed. But obviously I'm joking around a little bit. So I'm not as high on this card as a good number of other people are. Certainly not as high on it as you are, Callahan. But I do think it's very interesting, and I do think that this is not the type of card that I'm willing to dismiss outright. And I don't have like major issues with it necessarily. Well, I do have some pretty major issues with it, but I don't think that those issues necessarily preclude it from seeing play in cEDH. So, what do I like about this card? Obviously, I like the fact that it's a tutor, and it tutors into play, and it's an instant, and it's pretty cheap, coming in at 2 mana, kind of like Neoform. What do I not like about this card? Well, the fact that a creature has to die, that's not always the easiest thing to achieve. I think that trading in like your Tymna or your Najeela, casting this, it opens you up to a pretty big blowout. It's not necessarily all that different from Neoforms, so we can kind of like accept that that's probably going to be a reasonable line of play, like a non-zero amount of the time. But certainly for Najeela, that feels like a little bit iffier. For Tymna, it seems like a little less iffy. What I'm not necessarily that big on is the fact that you pretty much need to drop, like you need to lose or have die a 3-drop or greater for this to be particularly strong. I think that's, one of Neoform's strengths is that you're sacrificing mana dorks. And this card's relative weakness is that you pretty much always need to sacrifice a 3-drop or greater for it to really do anything. So I don't know that it'll actually see play in decks with like a lot of options, just because there's like a lot of small downsides that all kind of add up to it not necessarily I think being better than other options that we have in those colors. You know, like, again, like I think it isn't trivial, especially over like repeated games, to imagine that like people maybe like refrain from blocking your Tymna or your Najeela if you're making like an obviously bad attack and they know that you're playing this card. So like if you need this card to happen, then like that's kind of iffy. But on the other hand, you know, you can get major value off of like somebody removing somebody else's creature, which is kind of nuts. So it's kind of it's a cool card. I don't know that I'm gonna actually play it, but I'm excited to see people try it. I'm excited to see if it is in fact better than I am making it out to sound, because it could be. I like it a little bit more in decks with sack outlets, stuff like that, where you can kind of more consistently meet the condition. But no, it's a cool design. I'm a fan.
I really just want to hit one of those vicarious situations where somebody, you know, does, you know, just a value trade where, you know, they're having combat and they let their commander die or something like that, or, you know, their Crom dies or something, and you just say, oh, wait a minute, hold on.
Right.
I'm gonna go get my Notion Thief, or I'm gonna go get my Hull Breacher,
somebody like
or my Opposition Agent.
Chump blocks with their Spellseeker or something just to save.
And you say,
life.
oh, okay, I'm gonna turn that Spellseeker into a Dockside.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna cast Nadnos.
That's going to happen to me, and I'm never going to have that opportunity personally.
So
I yes, perfectly timed distortion. Yeah,
I think that the metagame right now, we still need more removal represented in the metagame. Still, a lot of the removal that you see is not removal that causes creatures to die. We still have exile effects or bounce effects, which are I would say a significant amount of the removal that's seen. So yes, someone is going to cast an Ass Trophy at somebody's Najeela, and then you'll be able to respond and go and get a Dockside out of the deal or something like that. But I mean, most of the time you're just gonna, I think, going to either have to telegraph a bad play, or, just kind of get lucky where somebody has something that's got enough of a butt to it that, like it's 4 mana or more for you to go and get something that you really want to go and get. I think you really nail it with the tension that this has with something like Neoform or Eldritch Evolution, where being able to increment upwards is very, very much more flexible than having to increment downwards. So I think this is one of those things that we're going to have to just kind of see it in the wild for a while to be able to get a better read on if it's really as good as some of the people are feeling like it is, or if just kind of the shape of the metagame right now with the creatures that we have seeing play and the amount of removal that we have seeing play,
i.e.
if this doesn't if this just doesn't have the support that it needs to really have a great presence in the metagame.
Yeah, all my opponents are going to have this plus Diabolic Intent, and I'm just always going to have this rotting away in my hand.
Yep. But even when they have that in Diabolic Intent, they need to have something that's big enough to support going and finding the.
Good point.
I mean, yes, you're almost always going to be able to go and get a Dockside out of it if you're in those colors. But the better cards, the things like Notion Thief, or things like a Hull Breacher, something that's giving you a better board presence as a result of the exchange. There's not a whole lot of creatures that are in play, and B, are getting removed.
Man, there are
to be able to make
Crom players who want to have some words with you right now.
There are Ikra Crom players, but how often do you see Ikra eat an Assassin's
You
Trophy?
never see Ikra on the battlefield.
they might get bounced, and that's like a whole other issue with this card is that so much of the removal in the format is bounce or exile.
And right, that was my point is that there's not enough creature dies removal, short of something like oh my goodness, Toxic Deluge, something like that, and that's kind of it. So anyway, we'll have to see.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm interested to see if like Hulk and Reanimator type decks do anything with this. But on to our next card, we've got another Golgari card. Or excuse me, what's this called? Witherbloom is what it's called?
No, it's Golgari.
Okay. There's no longer Boros, though. It's a lore hold. And so Witherbloom Apprentice, it's a black and a green creature that's 2/2 that has a magecraft that says whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So Cobble.
Yep.
This combos with a very particular chain spell.
Yes.
So tell us about kind of that and what you think on it.
So this is a card that people definitely in casual echelons are getting real excited about.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it's a A+B combo that kind of wins on the spot, and people in some places are comparing it to Oracle Consultation because it's a 2-mana creature plus a 2-mana spell and wins from any board state. I don't think that this is quite. It's not quite the same level. And the reason for that is when you're looking at Oracle plus Consult, first of all, the surface area is more narrow. So when you have your Oracle come into play, if people remove the Oracle, you can still get your combo because it's an ETB. So you really, really don't care about people having removal to be able to interact with it. In this particular case, you really do care about people having removal,
right?
Because that will disrupt the combo. And even worse, Chain of Smog, the way that it works, your opponents. So you can protect your Oracle plus Consult with counter magic. In the case of the Witherbloom Apprentice plus Chain of Smog, you target yourself with the Chain of Smog, discard 2 cards, copy it, discard 2 more cards, copy it, and you keep on going. Most opponents are going to be able to sustain you doing that a couple of times until you get yourself hellbent. And then once you're hellbent, you don't have any cards in hand anymore. And unless you've got like Underworld Breach in play or something where you have access to have some way of protecting yourself, your opponents are just going to wait for you to be hellbent, and then they'll counter the Chain of Smog because you won't be able to do anything with it because the forcing yourself into this hellbent state is a significant downside. So while the investment, the opportunity is roughly the same between the 2 combos, the way that it's going to play out is going to be way different. This is something that I definitely think, in casual groups, this is going to be something that's going to be really strong, and people are going to be, well, you did it, you got that combo. Okay, we'll do a new game. In competitive, people are just going to say, okay, go ahead. Yep, do it again. Okay, now I'll interact with you, and it's not going to see the success that you're seeing with Oracle and Consult by any stretch.
This combo needs white in order to be like good.
Right. It
desperately needs Grand Abolisher, Silence, or
exactly,
or Ranger Captain in order to really be functional.
At which point it becomes a 3-piece combo.
Right.
And
which is much less compelling.
Exactly. And that's all I got to say.
I definitely agree. It's all in a similar respect to something like Bomberman combo, Auriok Salvagers plus Lion's Eye Diamond. But I think Lion's Eye Diamond is a better card than either this or Chain of Smog in general. Obviously, the downside with Bomb Ran combos, you need an outlet. That's not insignificant. I do think that this will see play somewhere just because it's quite efficient and it's pretty generic, can fit into like any Golgari deck. But it's not without issues.
I have a hot take time. I do think that this card,
not Azorius.
No. I do think this card has the potential to get Chain of Smog banned. And people laughed at me when they said that. Well, hear me out.
Okay.
Because people did exactly that. So like, oh no. And like, if that gets banned, then you have to ban Thoracle and Consult. And I'm like, I don't know that I agree with that. And mostly because of the fact that when you look at like the philosophy the RC tends to take with their bannings, they're not really concerned about what's necessarily the best thing, but what's the more annoying thing, right? What's the thing that's causing discomfort within groups the most? I think cards like Sylvan Primordial, Primetime, Flash, Paradox Engine all kind of fit the bill of these are uncomfortable cards that are causing issues within certain communities throughout the format. And what I really think this is going to do is Chain of Smog is, because it doesn't feel like the spiky combo. People are going to be playing this and they're going to go, oh, well, this fits in every deck. Chain of Smog is relatively affordable. We're going to grab them and we're going to throw them in our decks, and it's great A plus B combo. And it's going to make people really upset because people don't like A plus B combos outside of cEDH, generally speaking. And I could make an argument that I think the RC would see that and see people getting upset to losing to A plus B combos. And go, okay, maybe we should axe one of these cards. I'm not saying that it will, but I think that it is not out of the realm of possibilities that Chain of Smog gets banned because of this card.
I don't see it.
I would not be surprised.
I say, why don't we open this one up to the floor, so to speak? Commenters, what do you think? Is Callahan completely wrong, or is he just a little wrong?
Oh, okay. So there's any
in this case, I have great affection for you, my friend, but I think you're way off. So.
I don't know. It just feels like one of those things where, I don't know. There's a lot of cards that I look at the RC bans that I think have no reason to be banned, and they're banned. And then there's cards that I think should absolutely be banned and they're not banned. And so that's
a whole other discussion.
Yeah, that sounds like a video.
It's just one of those things where if your traditional logic would say this isn't good enough to be banned, you're probably wrong, in my opinion, just because of the fact that the RC does not operate off of traditional logic. And I love Sheldon. I love those guys, but that's just how they want to run it. But anyway, moving on. We've got a new card, new land to talk about. It's called the Biblioplex. It's a colorless land. It types for colorless, and also you can it has an activate ability for 2 colorless. You tap it. Look at the top card of your library. If it's an instant or sorcery card, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. If you don't put that card into your hand, you may put it into your graveyard. Activate only if you have exactly 0 or 7 cards in hand. So this card is doing its best to not be Library of Alexandria, right? Right, Pongo?
Oh yeah.
And I have to say, boo to whoever named this card and didn't give it a library name.
Right.
Biblioplex is
yeah, but it should have been the Library of Strixhaven or something like that. That's what it should have been named.
I guess. I mean, like the name's fine in my opinion, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
The comparison to Library of Alexandria is very apt. But Library, this is not. What's interesting though is that I feel like being able to activate this when you have 0 cards in hand is like, in some ways, gonna happen more often in games of cEDH than having 7 cards in hand. I actually don't think that Library of Alexandria is like especially busted in cEDH. Some people think that it would be like utterly broken. I'm not convinced. I think that like, we're way too incentivized to be jamming like lots of fast mana and card disadvantage fast mana, and we don't have nearly as many cards that are just like refilling our hand quickly and interactions built around like Ancestral Recall and recurring Ancestral Recall to make sure that we can stay on our library. Not only that, we're also not like playing this 1-for-1 game, trading 1-for-1 with a single opponent. We've got multiple opponents and you can't really fall behind in tempo. Library of Alexandria is like a control card. It's really a card that's there for like mirrors between 2 control-y style decks. But, I'm kind of like going off on a bit of a tangent here. This card is not only not Library of Alexandria, I also think it's not particularly good. I think that looking at the top card of your library instead of drawing a card and only putting it into your hand conditionally, so sort of like a Narset activation a little bit, like Planeswalker Narset, is a lot worse than drawing a card naturally. It's not going to be incredibly consistent. I think a lot of decks that could conceivably play this probably just want to play like another colored mana source rather than play this, for like the very, very few times that they'll be able to get mana or be able to get value off of it. To say nothing of the fact that it essentially costs 3 mana to activate instead of 1 mana to activate, like Library of Alexandria. In case anyone's wondering, I mean, like, here you pay 2 mana and tap it. Library of Alexandria is a land that can generate mana. You forego generating mana to tap it to draw a card. So kind of like costs 1 mana in a way. Yeah, not much more to say. This card, big no.
Yeah, it succeeds at not being Library of Alexandria.
Yeah, exactly. It succeeds at not being a card that I'm not even sure would see nearly as much play as some people seem to think.
Right. If you want the effect, then you're better off with War Room, which
100%.
Which is not a great card in its own right, but is better at doing this than this.
Yeah.
I mean, this is really, if you've got a metagame where it's saturated with Hull Breacher and Notion Thief, and you know that you're going to be hellbent and you need to dig yourself out, because this doesn't draw cards. So, if you're hellbent, you can look at the top, you can look at the top of your library and, dig for removal. And if you find the removal, you can put it into your hand without actually drawing. So you don't offend the Notion Thief or Hull Breacher interaction there. But again, like that's a super narrow use case and wouldn't be the type of use case you would have for admitting a card and, committing a slot. So this is just no. That's all.
Gotcha. It's interesting. It's
bad card is bad.
Yeah, bad card is bad. Onto our last card we've got is a card that Cobble and I had some spirited debate upon earlier. It is Wandering Archaic. It is a modal dual-faced card. The front side is 5 colorless mana. That's a creature 4/4 that says whenever an opponent casts an instant or sorcery spell, they may pay 2 colorless. If they don't, you may copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. I'm not even going to read the backside because the backside doesn't matter. So Cobble and I were talking about this a lot, and I've had a lot of debate in the Lavinia Discord with people, particularly Phoenix, about this card and our opinions on it. And I have a different take than what you have, Cobble. But What is your assessment of this card and how do you feel about it?
I think that this is a card that is worth investigating in stacks lists, primarily Rule of Law, just because Rule of Law, before we even get into that, the first thing that people are going to do when they look at this is they're going to make comparisons to Rhystic Study because, this is a permissive effect. Your opponents are going to have a choice about paying mana or not paying mana when they take an action. And it's a passive kind of a effect where you're gaining value when your opponents are choosing not to pay the mana. So it's in the same way that Rhystic Study creates kind of two forces where you have a taxing force that they can choose to accept or not. And then when they choose not to accept that taxing force, then they're giving you value. It is 5 mana, which is definitely more than 3. So the reason why I say that Rule of Law is the place that I think probably makes sense to investigate this is because Rule of Law is the place where you are tipping the value, the individual value, the individual impact of your cards to be higher because you have the anticipation that you're only getting 1 spell per turn. So you are exploiting the fact that most lists are having, a very, very low, they're having high efficiency and low individual impact. Whereas Rule of Law lists want to have they're expecting everyone's going to have lower efficiency and higher individual impact. So you can accommodate having something that costs 5 for this type of ability. So why would you want this? Okay. First of all, we have tutors everywhere in the metagame. And so you can look at the proposition here. So either your opponents pay 2 more mana for every one of their tutors, or they give you a copy of that tutor every time they do that. There's absolutely circumstances when they feel like, I mean, most of the time it's just going to make their tutors cost more. In certain circumstances, if it's like a top of library tutor where they think they might be able to do something before you are able to get access to the card or whatever, then they might give you access to it. In either case, that's I would say a profitable exchange for the person who controls this creature.
Right.
The second more impactful case is for counter interactions. The way that this works is it's a trigger. So your opponent or some other player, again, this isn't just between you and an opponent. This is you are kind of vicariously interacting with the rest of the table. So you could have opponent A cast a spell and choose to pay the 2, and then have opponent B cast a counter spell. And you could say, well, obviously I'm not going to pay for it because now I'll get another copy of that counter and there'll be 2 counter spells going after that one original spell if it's the thing that we don't want to have resolve. Right. Or if you are wanting to not have somebody else's counterspell resolve, you can have your counterspell. Your counterspell is going to be on the stack above the original counterspell. So either they pay 2 more for their counterspells, or they accept the fact that you are automatically going to counter their counterspell if it's not something that you wanted to resolve. So it creates a huge amount of turbulence in counter wars. And then the next layer is just for the kind of the bigger spells, the bigger, higher individual impact spells like Ad Nauseam and Peer into the Abyss. They're never ever going to want you to have a copy of this. Exactly. So in this case, this is a straight, 2 mana tax on those effects. So, it also, Neoform and Eldritch Evolution as well. Those basically, if they let you have this, you're going to get whichever creature of, so if it's a creature that's going to be for a 3 CMC creature, for instance, off of a Neoform,
Right.
you're going to get a copy of that. And you don't have to sacrifice any creatures because you're just making a copy of the spell that's on the stack. And you'll be able to go and find a 3 CMC creature first. If you've got black, if you've got access to Opposition Agent or, Hull Breacher or something like that, you getting that thing first is going to be significant. So most of the time it's just a straight tax of 2 for those spells as well. So it winds up being, what's the artifact that costs 6?
God-Pharaoh statue.
God-Pharaoh statue. In a lot of cases, it's a God-Pharaoh statue that allows you to kind of vicariously interact with some of these, counter spells in interesting ways, and also allows you to, vicariously just get some value from cantrips that your opponents are okay with allowing you to have because they don't want to pay 3 mana for a cantrip or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it has a lot of really interesting interactions. So as I said, do you put this in Turbo Nas? No. Because in a Turbo Nas list, you want to have a high density of very efficient spells. You want, if you're extremely proactive and you want to be doing a very fast game, then your individual spells are going to be low individual impact and high efficiency. And that's what this is not. But Rule of Law is wanting to play a game that is counter to that, and it can accept the higher investment of paying 5 mana for this effect.
Right.
Yeah, actually,
that's my opinion.
Morgan or Spleenface brought this up before, and actually this is something that I've kind of felt for some time, and I think it applies to Rhystic Study as well within the context of Rule of Law decks. I think, you just end up paying the tax a lot of the time with your extra mana. You're only casting 1 spell per turn anyway, right? So I don't know. I'm very uncertain about this card. I think for 5 mana,
I think it's a bit steep at 5.
Yeah, it's a bit steep at 5. You can't really necessarily cheat it out or turbo it out in a lot of the same ways you might for God-Pharaoh statue. But
in its defense, being colorless opens up its accessibility.
Right.
In its defense. I don't know. I have a lot of opinions on this card.
Yeah, it's a very interesting card for sure.
I've had to develop a lot of opinions because in developing we're working on the Strixhaven update for Lavinia Primer right now. And Phoenix and I have a very stark opinions on this, where I would say Phoenix is even higher on this card than you are, Cobble. And he's wanting to play it in the deck and jam it in. And I'm more towards, Pongo's end of the spectrum, where to me, this feels like a trap card personally. And maybe that's a little hyperbolic, but what I mean by that is I feel like what's going to happen is because the decks that are going to want to play this are control decks, right? Control stacks decks. And especially, I'll just use a deck that I play literally hundreds of games with, Lavinia, as an example. I know everybody's going to roll their eyes because, Lavinia, it's the deck that's considering it, right? And in that context, here's going to be the issue, in my opinion, is you're going to spend a bunch of mana to get this out. And what's going to end up happening, excuse me. Wow, I cannot talk tonight. But what's going to end up happening is one of two things. Either one, people are just going to swallow their spells and not cast anything until they're able to deal with this in some way. And in a lot of times, I could speak from experience as the Lavinia player, a lot of times that is in the form of player removal. Or they're going to like pay the tax, which is what Pongo said. And what I think the very likely outcome of this is people just swallowing their spells and just playing Crom and swinging in your face and you can't block it. And like there's something to be said about the fact that this is very good against the Nas decks, right? Because their tools that they're going to have to deal with this are going to be all instants and sorceries. So you're going to be able to put them off of resources, and that is valuable. Is it 5 mana valuable is my question. And that's where I'm on the fence.
It is an interesting card, though. Like, I think we might be undervaluing sort of like some proactive applications of it, in the sense that, like, I don't know that I actually like this alongside Rule of Laws for the reasons that I mentioned. But if you kind of think about it as like a defense grid that is also like putting people off of like potentially winning on their own turn because of it's also attacks, people are going to have a hard time interacting with your proactive plays, because if they can't pay 2 extra for a counterspell, then you're going to get a counterspell for their counterspell, right?
Right.
So it has that angle, which means that you can use it to protect your own sort of like game-winning potential big spells. Right. And in addition, you're putting people off of potentially making their big plays instead. So, it's interesting. 5 mana is a lot, though. Like, I don't want to say that it's like a Turbo Nas mirror breaker because of that, right? Like, where you can like get 5 colorless mana, slam it, and like, then everyone else is kind of like struggling to win, where you're going to like go off with protection in a way.
It's going to put you in a better position for sure.
Yeah. But I do like it alongside counterspells, like much more than I like it alongside other stacks effects, because again, like it kind of gives like ward 2 to your counterspells in a way.
Yeah.
I would say that 5 mana is not as astronomical as I think a lot of people evaluate it to be, especially in a world where people are routinely playing, very early. I'm not going to say turn 1, turn 2 or whatever, but, very early Croms or very early Tevesh Sats and whatnot. The fact that it's colorless mana makes it all the more easy to be able to play early. And I would say that I, in my opinion, with Rule of Law, I see this in the same way as Rule of Laws become more powerful in multiples, because once somebody tries to remove one of them, well, now they're held up from removing more. This, I feel like, dovetails into that. So if someone wants to remove this and there's a Rule of Law on the battlefield, well, then that's their turn. If someone removes the Rule of Law, then, well, they still have this to contend with, and it's going to be applying a very similar pressure. And the fact that it's on a creature that is a 4/4 that's got a good body, I think I'm not saying that this is a meta warping card or anything like that, but I think it's worth investigation. Because I think it has potential to be.
Can we all take a moment to acknowledge how awful the backside of it is, though?
I mean,
it doesn't have a backside. Nope, its backside just says Deck Master and has 5 little pips on it.
The backside is so bad. It's so bad.
I mean,
oh my gosh.
It is still an extra option that you do have, right? And
I mean,
like you never know. Like I could easily see this getting there in a game somehow. But
I mean, if it was an instant, I could understand using it as, our opponent just cast Adnaz quick. Let's give everybody
like an oh shit button.
Oh yeah, that would be pretty spicy. But like, yeah.
God.
At sorcery? No.
Yeah, no way.
I'm sorry.
I mean, you can use it to, in conjunction with a top deck tutor, right?
I guess.
Nice 4 mana to hand tutor. And
the rest of your all your opponents get to look to. At the same time.
Cross your fingers that they don't find like a free counter magic or counter spell.
Yeah.
like the card is better for having an extra option. It's not worse for having an extra option, however bad that extra option might be, right?
Sure.
I guess. I don't know. I don't know.
It's marginal.
I said this in our show notes, and I want to acknowledge that I wrote this because I was feeling very hyperbolic earlier when I wrote this. But I said, I will eat my shorts if you ever get to cast anything substantive off this card, off of a copy. I just, nobody's going to cast Appear into the Abyss into this card. Nobody.
No, that's not the point.
It's
right?
That's like the thing about it is it's like nobody's going to try to get in a counter war with you with this cards on the battlefield because everybody's going to know like this thing does the thing, right? Like
Which
they're going to pay the 2, right? I mean, that's fine, but that's my point is it's going to come down to they're going to, like I said, I really think people are just going to sit and eat their cards until or swallow their cards until they get to like an unsub or a snap or something like that, and then snap it, and they're fine with you snapping something else off the battlefield in most cases, and just going off anyhow. And so that's kind of how I see it going down. I would love to be proven wrong because the card is cool as hell.
I do think that it's potentially at its best as like a pseudo defense grid / pseudo like tempo piece, right? Like
right.
I don't know. There was something. What was it Morgan said before we went on? I don't even remember now. He said something really interesting. I can't remember. That's where I'm at right now. Listen, I was looking. This is our 3rd set review, by the way, guys. We've done 3 of these things together already.
And we're about to do a 4th pretty soon, right?
Yeah, next week because Commander 2021. Yay. And none of our set reviews have been less than 2.5 hours long. Oh my gosh.
This is the first one.
This is the first one that's looking like it's going to clock in under 2.5 hours. I love it. But yeah, I mean, do you guys have any final thoughts before we head out?
No. Tell us what you think about Wandering Archaic down in the comments below. I'd be very interested to see what people's assessments are.
Yeah. Feel free to call me a cynic. Please feel free to let me know. Because I probably am just being way too cynical with this.
And
tell us if Kasmina should be the Enigma Sage or
the Enigma Sage. Yeah.
Let us know.
Enigma Sage.
And let us know if we missed anything. There's a couple of cards I can think of that will certainly see a small amount of play in very, very specific places that we might not have discussed.
Because we don't want to do 3.5 hours.
Exactly. So. But, like marginal sort of cards. This set overall is like a little bit lower powered.
Underwhelming.
Compared to some sets that we've had recently. But, that's okay. I think that it's not a bad power level. I just think that, we're kind of on a hedonic treadmill of sorts where, you get a ton of really powerful Magic sets and then you get one that's a little bit underwhelming, perhaps more of a regression toward the mean in terms of power level. And it kind of just feels far worse by comparison.
I would say
Culling
the
Ritual is sweet.
The supplemental stuff in this set is so flippin' cool. Like the Mystical Archive, they knocked that out of the park. Like both the normal version. Well, I mean, they almost knocked it out of the park. They kind of waffled on the stolen artwork thing. It blows my mind that shit can happen.
I mean, that's not on Wizards. That's on that individual artist, but that's a whole other, that's not the topic that we're talking about here.
But no, I mean, I think this set overall, like, the power level overall is pretty good, but I actually think it's like a knock out of the park, from a like full, like a holistic point of view. Like I just went and ordered a set booster today. Cause I mean, I'm really excited about it. I want to get my hands on Mystical Archive cards. I want to get my hands on some of these MDFCs and stuff that's coming out in them. And I will say, I haven't been super impressed with some of the stuff I've seen coming out of all of the Commander 21 stuff, but I don't know. I'm actually pretty happy with the set. I think it's really exciting. And I'm much more excited for this set than I thought I was going to be when they announced it last year.
It's going to be great to draft. That I can say already.
Yeah, this will be a really fun draft set. What nobody is prepared for, though, is the fact that Thassa's Oracle and Tainted Pact are going to be legal and historic, baby. I just can't believe that.
Somewhat less good in 60 card.
Yeah,
it's a little bit less good, but it's wild
to be
to
singleton is a pretty significant
That's a
downside.
significant.
in 60
Did you
cards.
guys-
Just in general? Yeah.
Did you guys see the tweet I made? I think it was last week, where it was like Wizards is like Thassa's Oracle, Lutri, and Tainted Pact will all be legal and historic, and it's just this gif of a guy, and I said cEDH players, and it's just like I've been training for this moment my whole life.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Well,
At least since a couple of years ago, yeah, or last year. Yeah.
Well, that about wraps things up for us today. Just a quick reminder that you can follow us on Twitter at SculptyBoys, or you can find a direct link in our link tree in the description below. Want to also give a extra shout out to all of our patrons who help keep the lights on. If you too would like to become a patron, you can head on over to patreon.com/The Mind Sculptors, or check out the link in the description. Also, one more reminder that if you are going to be buying some cards, make sure to check out our TCG Player affiliate link down in the description. Buy your cards through there and help us out. Thank you again for joining us, and from all of us here at The Mind Sculptors, I'm Callahan. We'll see you next time.